Leaders with ADHD often bring exceptional creativity and energy, but may also struggle with focus and follow through. So, what strategies have you found most effective for helping them harness their strengths while managing those challenges?
So first, before I go into strategies, I'll tell you a little bit about a kind of a philosophy or approach, which then gets into the strategies. And that is designing for strengths rather than addressing deficits. And how we do that is, well, first we look at what comes easily to you and why. And once we know the why, then we can design for more of that, reducing friction in your daily life so that you can access those strengths and leverage them more often, which helps with focus and consistency.
Ever wonder why the smartest leaders often struggle the most with productivity? It's not because they lack discipline or drive. It's because their brains are working overtime. In this episode, we're going to be unpacking why traditional productivity hacks often fail high-performing professionals and what it takes to effectively lead without burning out. Today, we're joined by Frankie Berkoben, Executive Coach for ADHD Leaders in Tech at FranklyQuiteADHD. She's an executive coach and sought-after speaker who's worked with leaders at Google, Airbnb, and even the White House. Frankie helps intellectually brilliant professionals move from cycles of overwhelm to clarity and sustainable success. We're going to be talking about how executive functioning impacts leadership, what it means to find the sweet spot between ambition and capacity, and explore how leaders with ADHD can leverage their unique strengths while managing challenges around focus and consistency. If you've ever felt like you're pushing harder but getting diminishing returns, this conversation is for you. Tune in to discover how understanding your brain and your limits can help you lead with greater focus, balance, and impact in today's demanding AEC world. But before we jump in, I want to tell you about AEC PM Connect, the premier event where AEC firm leaders explore real-world strategies to drive performance, empower teams, and lead with purpose. At this event, we'll be announcing the winners of the AEC PM Awards, honoring professionals who exemplify excellence and leadership in project management. What if someone from your firm were named AEC PM of the Year? Imagine the impact the recognition could have on your people, your culture, and your firm's reputation. Visit aecpmconnect.com to register for the event happening on June 10th, 2026 at Forest Gate Country Club in New Jersey. To download the nomination guide, you can visit aecpmawards.com before nominations close on February 28th. I'm your host, Rebecca Swaby, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast, previously the Engineering Career Coach Podcast. Let's dive in. Frankie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Rebecca. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm so glad you're here with us. To get started, can you tell our listeners about yourself, a little bit about yourself, and how you got started in coaching and leadership development?
Gladly. Yeah, I'm Frankie Berkoben. I'm an executive coach and I work with mid to senior leaders in tech who have either ADHD or what I call situational ADHD, which is executive functioning challenges that may be situational, cyclical, or temporary, context dependent. And I got started in leadership coaching. Actually, I've been a coach for about 4 years. And I started with primarily ADHD gifted adults, professionals, usually in tech because nerds of a feather flock together. And, I live in San Francisco. This is, this is my scene.
Yeah.
And it was actually postpartum after I had a baby. My brain stopped functioning the way that it used to function. And I recognized, wow, all of these challenges that I'm having now do have a name. There are different types of executive functioning. So I had difficulty with memory and recall, as well as emotion regulation. I was high highs and like crushing lows. And I was thinking, wow, like a lot of people call this mommy brain, or there are euphemisms for it, but because of my background in ADHD specifically, I was like, clearly this is not solely part of the neurodiversity world. Neurodiversity is normal, i.e. we all have differences in brains and different preferences, how we process information. And that got me thinking, well, wouldn't it be helpful if we all knew a little bit more about executive functioning when it comes to busy and stressful lives. And another thing that was happening within my practice was my coaching clients coming to me were starting to go beyond ADHD. They were like, I resonate with everything you say except the label. Like, I've never had this problem now, but my second kid is here. Or I just got promoted. Or half my team is being laid off. And suddenly I'm having difficulties that I didn't before. And everything you're saying resonates. So again, that was another, I don't know,
That's interesting.
nail in the coffin, I guess, of this isn't just about ADHD. We should take this out of the remedial ADHD neurodiversity space and into, wow, this is what happens in stressful situations. Your prefrontal cortex goes offline, and your ability to tap into these executive functioning skills is less consistent, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. And it sounds like it must have been a really frustrating period in your life when you're looking towards, ADHD and other potential labels and feeling like it's not totally the right fit. What was it that you felt was specifically missing that led you to continue the search?
Well, I think it was the fact that it wasn't really, that it was talked about in two different worlds, like postpartum or stress and burnout or neurodiversity. Actually, three different worlds, I guess. But as if it was separate things, whereas actually it's the same experience, but for different root causes. And so recognizing, oh, wow, this isn't about differences. This is about similarities. And so what often frustrates me is when a common thread isn't acknowledged.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the kind of systems thinking aspect of that. So that was part of it. And then on a personal side, I was like, I just figured out how to build systems that really support the way I work, the way my brain functions, my preferences and values. And now I have to do it again. It felt like starting from scratch.
Oh, that's so interesting and very relatable, to be honest. Some of the things that you're describing. I'd love to hear more about the element of stress. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that piece and how that factors in and how that showed up in yourself and others that you coach.
Yeah, well, when we're in stressful situations, we tend to go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, especially if the stress is too high. And what I've noticed in many of my clients who are mid to senior leaders who have high visibility, high impact, potentially high risk projects or initiatives or roles, there's that amplification of expectations, so really high expectations, combined with often fewer resources or not enough support or not quite enough bandwidth to meet those expectations. And the wider the gap, the bigger the stress, the bigger the gap there is to bridge.
Yeah.
And so when that happens, all of the executive functioning skills, so that's basically getting things done, how to execute on things. So it's how we pay attention to something, how we make sense of it, file it away for short-term and long-term memory, retrieve it, so recall, making plans, prioritizing, initiating, following through, completing, and also communicating. It's also to do with regulating focus, emotion, and motivation too. So that's what I mean by executive functioning. It's getting stuff done from soup to nuts, from start to finish. And so with higher stress, and it's undeniable that we are living in a world where there's a rising tide of uncertainty. There's a lot of people in survival mode generally around us. A lot of people are experiencing belt tightening within their companies, families. There's just a lot of existential threats around job security, as well as several other things. And that stress, that heightened stress, just takes away from our ability to be grounded, make wise decisions rather than knee-jerk decisions, to have patience and curiosity rather than jumping to snap decisions.
Mhm. Oh, that's yeah, so important to know, and thank you for spelling out executive functioning a bit more. A lot of the things that you mentioned, they seem like pretty straightforward things. As you're saying, following up, going to meetings, taking notes, being organized. But when you're in a situation where you're experiencing a lot of stress and overwhelm, what's the impact on a lot of these, the things that we used to do to function really well?
Well, if you were able to do this number of things before, and for those of you listening, and I have my arms out wide, you have a just much smaller set that's available to you.
Uh-huh.
And so, if you think about number of slots or something, you may have had 10 slots before, but then you only have 3. So, yeah, that means you might be forgetting your keys all the time. It might mean that you're really short with that person who slightly irks you. It might mean that you lose track of time a lot more and run up against deadlines a lot more than you'd like to. And then you kind of feel like you're on a hamster wheel of being behind and not necessarily having the resources or even headspace to figure out how to catch up.
Okay, so
transform your technical experts into impactful leaders with EMI's Engineering Leadership Accelerator. Tailored for AEC professionals, this program enhances communication, delegation, and decision-making skills. Flexible, interactive, and designed to fit your team's schedule. Elevate your team's leadership capabilities today. Visit engineeringmanagementinstitute.org and click on corporate training.
In your work, you've coached a lot of leaders at big organizations, Google, Airbnb, even the White House, which is pretty amazing. What patterns have you noticed in the challenges that high-performing professionals face around focus and consistency? And you talked about it a little bit, but any more detail you can provide about how executive functions play a role in effective leadership?
So a huge common theme here is that high performers tend to have a very high bar for themselves. And the logical fallacy is that peak performance, what you're capable of on your best day, is what you should be capable of on any given day. So that's the main thing that I see is when you can reach high heights, I guess.
Yeah.
When you can reach really high degrees of performance and capability, you have such high potential that it's rewarding. It feels great. People around you are looking for that. And this expectation that your average should be your peak. I mean, when you put it like that, of course it can't be. And yet it's so compelling. It feels so good. It feels so rewarding. It feels like, things are finally clicking. And so when I work with leaders who have glimpses of that inconsistently, there's a lot of shame around not being able to meet that more frequently. And when ADHD or other types of executive function or variability are in the mix, it is more elusive to find those peaks. It's much more context dependent, as well as the amplitude of variability, the difference between you performing at your best and you performing at your lowest is much, much bigger. And that can be really frustrating. And so it's not just the amplitude, but also the frequency of variability. From day to day, it could be wildly different when executive functioning variability is in the mix. And actually, something you said earlier around executive functions, that they seem pretty straightforward. And that is the huge thing here, is that the simple things are not actually easy when executive functioning challenges are in the mix. The complex things can come really easily. So there's not a one-to-one relationship between complexity and difficulty. And that is something else for people to wrap their heads around, that especially in hierarchical environments. So I used to work in environmental engineering, which is very much you start at the bottom and then you work your way up.
Yeah.
Is if you have to prove that you can do the more rote or administrative work, or the stuff that relies on consistency, time management, emotional regulation, like the doing, the implementation, and not the ideation, the strategy, the creative thinking pieces. So those are often where I often see people stuck, is they're in roles which have a higher dependence on executive functioning and less dependence on the things that makes people's brains fizz, that make them sparkle, that really make them come alive. Their ability for cross-functional, real interdisciplinary specialty work, the systems thinking aspects of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And coming from the environmental engineering world too, like I totally hear you on, when you start, maybe your job is more administrative, for example. And so as a young person, you don't necessarily recognize how the job would evolve and turn into something that is more cross-disciplinary and leveraging creative problem solving across different silos, which, you might struggle. And then ultimately, okay, so Frankie, leaders with ADHD often bring exceptional creativity and energy, but may also struggle with focus and follow through. So what strategies have you found most effective for helping them harness their strengths while managing those challenges?
So first, before I go into strategies, I'll tell you a little bit about a kind of a philosophy or approach, which then gets into the strategies. And that is designing for strengths rather than addressing deficits. And how we do that is, well, first we look at what comes easily to you and why. And once we know the why, then we can design for more of that, reducing friction in your daily life so that you can access those strengths and leverage them more often, which helps with focus and consistency. And there are three things that really tell us a lot about why those things come easily to you, why those are your strengths. The first is that innate values and innate abilities. The second is learned, acquired skills, wisdom, or knowledge. And then the third is that it might be context dependent, something in the environment or situation. And that can be tools or the type of project or your team or something which engenders interest, but also may help with processing modalities. And what I mean by processing modalities is the way that we pay attention to, work with, and manipulate and understand information and how we communicate it out. So things that come easily to you, what we're trying to do is find ways of tweaking your systems and environments, and that can include your habits too, to reduce friction, make those things more easily accessible, which increases the likelihood that you'll be in flow. It increases the likelihood that you'll have emotional bandwidth to overcome the activation energy hurdle of something that feels challenging or uninteresting, or like you're plagued by uncertainty on where to start. So there's an element of both logistics and emotion in here. And why we focus on strengths rather than focusing on remedying deficits is because it works. It's also, it sounds like it makes total sense, but it's really difficult in practice. And so that's why we work at it again and again and again. There's a lot of iteration, experimentation, and design in this. This is really the design thinking process applied to personal and professional development. But, we have a negativity bias naturally. From an evolutionary standpoint, we scan for threats much more than we scan for things that are totally okay. And then we're problem solvers, especially in engineering and product and these sorts of things where we're thinking about and we're rewarded for solving problems. So that also focuses our attention a little bit more on what is wrong. Where does it feel bad? What's going poorly? Adding to that, any sort of executive functioning challenge. So there are two aspects of this. One is emotion regulation, and the other is working memory. Working memory is like our brain's RAM. what we have to work with at any one time. And if you're more restricted in that for whatever reason, if your brain is crammed or you haven't slept well the night before, that natural negativity bias becomes front and center rather than off to the side in your vision, like in your field of view or your understanding of a situation. So we're going from a wide field of view to a much more narrower and more negative field of view. So you're not capturing everything. When you add in emotion regulation, it's bad things feel even worse. So in some ways, it feels like that is even more intense. The problem, the situation, the gap between reality and where it needs to be is amplified or exacerbated, at least from a perception standpoint. There's the fact that we live in a society that rewards social norms that rely on executive functions, consistency, follow through, time management, etc. So that all accumulates to provide multiple potential hurdles and actual hurdles to adopting a strengths-based approach.
Okay, thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by a strengths-based approach? You touched on it a little bit, but maybe you can walk me through an example just so that our listeners can sort of understand what approach you would take when working with somebody who's struggling.
Yeah. So there's a fantastic client that I've been working with who's a director of product and was really stuck on creating a deck for the exec team. They knew the story and narrative they wanted to share. They had all the data to hand, but were kind of getting lost in the details because they couldn't also see the big picture at the same time. Now, this person is really, really compelling, very charismatic. When he really believes in something, people are just like, oh, I want to listen. I'm brought along with you. So there's the storytelling, charisma, influence aspect of it that is a strength of his. Another is he's really good at seeing the big picture. And so we had to zoom out to that. Okay, what does big picture mean for this? Both logistically as well as for how you want to present things.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was using a lot of his acquired knowledge, being like, oh, if I treated this deck as its own product, what does my audience really need to know versus what do I want to convey?
Yeah. So it's almost tricking yourself, packaging it up as something you like doing.
I'd say shifting your perspective.
Shifting your perspective.
Because if you see it as tricking yourself, a part of your brain, because everybody is very smart, and especially your brain, if there's some inkling that you're being forced to do something or being tricked, it will find a way out, especially if there's, pathological demand avoidance or like, don't tell me what to do.
Right. Understood.
But that's a really good point because it brings up another thing, which is crucial in this, which is not just the what and the how, but first and foremost, why? The interest. What's in it for you? Why is it important for you to do this well? Oh, actually, it's not important. Great. Then you don't have to put together an amazing deck. But, it's important to me because, I'm looking to become VP of product. Okay, so what do you need to showcase in order for that? Like, how does that transform your approach to building this deck, right? So an interesting part of that was the big picture approach. Instead of slide by slide, was cool. Let's get some Post-its out and just like move them around. So there's a bit of tactical and visual aspect of physically moving items of the narrative around, putting them in the nope, this isn't going in pile, and the physical manipulation of the nuggets of information presented, as well as like it's so simple when you say it, but so this is not a hack, but and sometimes the solutions are really simple, but that doesn't mean that getting to that solution is a quick path. But the solution was, build the deck in grid view instead of single slide view?
Yeah.
Because then you have the context, the big picture at the same time. So that's one example of using a strengths-based approach.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like a lot of it is, having somebody in your corner to help take a step back with you and figure out, well, how can we package what we're working on in a way that actually aligns with, as you said, your interests, your strengths in a positive way.
Yeah, it's a thought partnership for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your experience, what helps leaders stay in the sweet spot where they're challenged and growing, but not overwhelmed and stretched too thin?
Can I say coaching?
Oh, absolutely. That's why you're here.
Well, obviously, I'm going to say coaching. But the real part of this is having perspective and periods where you can zoom out and reflect and reorient to what is important, because we do have scope creep. We do have drift. We get brought along with other people's points of view and maybe need to step back and say, what are we really trying to do here? What is nice to have but not a need to have? And what are the things that really enhance the experience for me personally, my team, and the organization or the users? So I basically periodic zooming out so that you can zoom back in, and you're balancing the big picture view with the detailed work.
Okay, great. And for leaders that feel that they always need to push harder, what role can self-compassion play in sustaining both their performance and their well-being?
Well, how long do we have? Well, this is a classic in so many ways, and I'm sighing because it's really sad that so many people think they need to push harder, that they're not enough, that there are elements of imposter syndrome that are related to performance, when the truth of it is they're doing more than enough, and perhaps they're over-delivering when excellence isn't actually the goal. Maybe momentum, like imperfect momentum, like 90% good enough or 80% good enough, gets you a lot further, and the progress compounds. It's often exponential to see that. What I mean by that is that the more momentum you have, the more progress, the safer it becomes to quote unquote fail, to see what assumptions didn't hold, what plans did I have, what experiments didn't end up working out, and what does that tell me about what my needs are? What does that tell me about what works for me? What does that tell me about what works for me in this context? Because we're all part of our systems. So the self-compassion separates identity from behavior. If performance and achievement is equated to worth as a person, as a human being, as a team member, as a manager, as a leader of an organization, then the two get confused very quickly, and then things take on outsized importance. So first of all, separating out worth from performance. And self-compassion, to be clear, it's not indulgence. It's not being soft on oneself. It's discipline and kindness coexisting. It's knowing when to push, even though it feels uncomfortable, and when to step back, even though there's a voice in your head saying you should be pushing. And another example would be doing something for future you because you have extra capacity today, but you know that next week when you're slammed with back-to-back meetings, you won't have time. Or, it's having more of a relationship with past you who was doing the best they could with the tools they had at the time, tools and knowledge, and not being mired in regret or frustration or, resentment at oneself. as well as doing things with love and respect for your future self. And that means not pushing all the garbage from your to-do list from today onto tomorrow.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, so it's those aspects of, just having more of a relationship with your past self and your future self that is one of respect and kindness and acceptance, rather than I'm not the person I think I should be. And anytime I hear the word should, just, need to, those are red flag words for me in any of my coaching sessions or conversations, just generally in life. And that tells me that there's some harsh or at least outsized judgment and expectation, which is far from where somebody thinks that they currently are. And often that assumption is based on other people's highlight reels or what we've internalized as what we should act, think, perform, behave, communicate like, and not what actually works for us. So in the coaching that I do with most of my clients, a self-compassion piece is letting go of what we think we should be, who we should be, and accepting, how do I actually operate? What are my strengths? And often strengths are double-edged swords. So also acknowledging, this is why, just because I'm really good at problem solving, this didn't land in that meeting. Yeah, caring a lot is great for certain roles and certain companies, but in other situations, it can be thought of as ruinous empathy. So like that, again, it's about perspective and acceptance of the nuance of things. And as I said, again, separating out labels and identity from behavior.
Yeah.
And actions.
And gaining that perspective is so important, which is sort of underlines the importance of having a coach. But let's talk about organizations for a minute here too. What can organizations do to better support team members with ADHD so that they can better thrive without feeling the pressure to fit into a traditional productivity model?
Well, this is thorny because of HIPAA and HR and disclosure and things like that. So I'm going to answer a different question, which is, how can organizations better support leaders or team members who have different processing styles, who think differently, who exhibit executive functioning challenges either over a short period of time or over a longer period of time? Because it's the curb cut effect. Things that work for some of us all of the time can work for all people some of the time. And so there are a few things organizations can do. There's awareness and actually having senior leadership bought into and attending things like talks at ERG's employee resource groups around invisible disabilities, around neurodiversity, around Disability Awareness Month, around job-related accommodations. And it's important to have senior leadership present because it makes it okay for people to engage, it sends a very strong signal that we're listening, think this is important. Humans are humans, not robots, and we're not expecting you to be robots. Yeah, but having senior leadership present and engaged in conversations especially about differences of lived experience, especially when people are open about their lived experience. And there's a very popular talk that I present, which is on the three different aspects of executive function. Three different lenses on executive functioning challenges. It's what it looks like on the outside and the judgments or perceptions that people put on that. Like if somebody has a problem with time management, they're lazy, they're disorganized, they're disrespectful, they're always late to meetings. Like this means, so there's attributing intent to impact. So there's what it looks like on the outside. And when you name some of those thoughts, people in the audience go, oh, yeah, I felt that too. And then there's also the second lens is, what does it feel like on the inside? To the person who is immensely capable, but experiencing brain fog. Like it feels destabilizing. There's panic. There's, I should be able to do this. There's judgment. There's reaching and clutching at straws, being like, what works for somebody else? And so there's, what does it feel like on the inside? And again, telling some of those stories which are real but anonymous. So I can present from my clients' experiences. Really touches people who have both experienced it, but also are prone to jumping to conclusions on the other side of it. So there's that aspect of, oh, now I see it. And then the third piece is the neurological and neurocognitive and psychological pieces of why does this happen? So there's the executive functioning aspects as well as behavioral psychology, which ties it all together. So for the people who are experiencing executive functioning challenges, why is this? Why is it so context dependent? Why am I excellent at this thing one day and abysmal the very next? And understanding that piece of it. So like with understanding comes acceptance, comes the ability to articulate and then advocate for those changes. And then also for the people on the outside, they're like, oh, so I've heard what it feels like on the inside, but I still don't understand why. So the understanding why really helps bridge the gap between where people want to be and where they currently are, or where people want others to be performing at and how they're currently showing up. So that's a huge part of it, is the storytelling, the lived experience, and inviting in experts if there isn't a culture with a high degree of psychological safety and openness and transparency, because there is stigma around invisible disabilities, the stigma around disabilities in general. And I'm not saying ADHD and executive functioning challenges are necessarily a disability, because it's all context dependent. It's, it's the eye of the beholder who defines it as a disability. But it is a difference of operating, and that acknowledging that differences exist I've seen some beautiful shifts happen in companies where senior leaders have been much more open about their challenges, their needs, just unapologetic about, my memory is not so good today. Can we take notes, or do you mind if we press record on this so that my note taker can join? No shame, not a big deal. Just here it is as a statement. So taking some of the weight out of it. And that's, again, what some of the self-compassion work can do. It's like, yep, this is just a fact. This is a simple request.
That makes a lot of sense. Sharing stories, sharing your own personal stories and vulnerabilities potentially in the moment, small moments or big moments. It gives other people that work with you permission to do it as well too. So,
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Great advice. And just one final question. If you could share with us a final piece of advice that you'd like to share with other AEC leaders and project managers who want to lead with more clarity, confidence, and humanity.
Practice connection. And connection in 3 ways. One is with yourself, understanding, your raw spots, your tendencies, your patterns, your rhythms, and making sure that, maybe when you're cranky at the end of the week, that's not when you have your most difficult conversations, that sort of thing. So connecting with yourself, and I also mean, with your body. We, as problem solvers and people who value intellectual pursuit, we forget that our bodies are a huge resource of information. Like, emotions are data that tells us a lot about our values and our needs, and if untended to, they'll find ways of getting themselves met. The second is connection to other people. And that doesn't necessarily mean vapid small talk, but genuine moments of connection, of appreciation, of togetherness, of similarity, that goes a lot towards making other people feel seen, heard, connected, and inspired. Because ultimately, it's not about being right, it's about being trusted. And if you're going through a challenging time in your company and you really need people to get behind a change, trust and connection goes a long way. And then the third thing is connection to a sense of possibility, wonder, awe, AWE. This can feel very nitty-gritty, and it's so easy to get sucked into the doing and the details without zooming out and being like, wow, look at what's possible. This is what I'm grateful for. Look at everything we've done. Holy moly. And so that piece, because we're emotional creatures just as much as we are logical. And so connecting to yourself, to other people, and to possibility or wonder. Other things that can help people lead with more clarity, confidence, and humanity.
Thank you so much, Frankie. Thanks for that advice, and thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome, Rebecca.
Please remember you can find the show notes for this episode at aecleadershippodcast.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as any links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during the podcast.